and welcome. I'm Geeta Mohan and you're watching World Today. We've been tracking this story very closely. An Indian researcher at Georgetown University, Badr Khan Suri, who was detained earlier, his deportation now has been temporarily halted by a US federal judge. The case is now making headlines, not just for the ruling, but for the explosive allegations surrounding his arrest. Accused of having ties to Hamas, flagged as a national security threat, and suddenly detained by US immigration authorities. This case has sparked debates on academic freedom, political targeting, and free speech in America. But is this really about national security, or is it a calculated move to silence a critic of US policy on Israel? Here is where we decode the story for you.
Badr Khan Suri, a postdoctoral fellow specializing in peace building and conflict resolution in Iraq and Afghanistan, was arrested at his home in Arlington, Virginia, before being swiftly detained in a Louisiana facility, a location known for holding high-risk deportees. The Department of Homeland Security alleges that he has been spreading anti-Semitic propaganda and maintaining ties with Hamas-linked organizations. They claim that his work has indirectly supported extremist narratives and that his affiliations pose a national security risk. But Suri's legal team strongly disputes these accusations, calling them baseless and politically motivated. His lawyer argues that his arrest has nothing to do with security, but everything to do with silencing voices critical of US foreign policy on Israel. Suri's wife, a US citizen of Palestinian descent, has been an outspoken critic of the US administration. Could this have put him on the government's radar? This case is already sparking comparisons to previous crackdowns on Palestinian activists and foreign academics in the US. The American Civil Liberties Union has condemned the arrest, stating that deporting someone over their viewpoints violates the very principles of free speech and academic independence. So what happens now? Can a judge actually stop a deportation? The answer is yes. Federal judges have the power to intervene if they believe an individual's rights are being violated. And that's exactly what happened here. Judge Patricia Tolliver-Giles issued an emergency ruling blocking Suri's deportation for now. But will the government comply? Under the Trump administration, immigration enforcement has often clashed with the judiciary, even defying court rulings in the past. The administration has a history of pushing executive power to the limits where it comes to deportations. Meanwhile, Georgetown University is standing by their researcher, stating that they have seen no credible evidence of wrongdoing. Academics across the country are now rallying behind Suri, fearing this could set a dangerous precedent. Where scholars with dissenting views are forced out under the pretext of national security. For now, Suri remains in detention, awaiting further legal proceedings. But with growing pressure from activists, academics, and legal experts, this case is far from over. Will Suri get a fair trial? Or is this the beginning of a broader crackdown on scholars who challenge America's political narrative? Bureau Report, India Today.
And joining me to discuss what's happening on the ground in the United States of America, what are the grounds for these deportations and revocations, and the panic mode that Indian community, students in America really are in. I'm being joined for all this and more by Alexander Holtzman. He's Director, Deportation Defense Clinic. Alexander, thank you so much for joining us on the network. The fact that last time when we were speaking, we were talking about what happens if there is a scenario such as this. Now, I'm talking to you when it is happening as we speak. Let's begin with Suri's case. His deportation has been halted for now, but what are the grounds on which he can actually stay back in the United States of America and not really be deported since he is married to an American of Palestinian origin and has a child too?
Yes, thank you for having me. I believe 3 children, if I read correctly. So part of his argument for remaining in the United States will first be responding to the charging document in immigration court called a notice to appear. I've yet to see that document, but if it's similar to the charging document in Mr. Mahmoud Khalil's case, it's likely that they will charge Mr. Suri with violating the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 237. The specific provision that Mr. Khalil was charged with, at least, was 237A4CI. And basically, what that says is that the Secretary of State, in this case, Marco Rubio, would have designated Mr. Suri as an individual who's uh, done something adverse to the foreign policy consequences of the United States. I think that is likely to be a dubious charge, and I suspect his attorney will first and foremost review the charging document to see that if ICE can sustain the charges that they've issued against Mr. Suri.
Legally speaking, Alexander, where does this move from here? Can people who are being charged, detained, and then becoming or being put in the deportable category, can they really go to court, and will that hold, or can the White House overturn a court judgment?
So the answer to your last question is no. The White House cannot overturn a court judgment. And in fact, there are serious concerns about the rule of law currently in the United States, with the Trump administration flouting another court order recently with respect to not deporting Venezuelans. A judge appointed by George W. Bush halted deportations in that case, but those Venezuelans were subsequently deported to El Salvador nonetheless. And the judge is currently requiring the Department of Justice to explain why they did not follow a court order. And I suspect this will be an ongoing question with the Trump administration following court orders.
Right, but that's also very interesting, Alexander, because we've seen a judge take a very serious note, halt the deportation of Badr Suri, but then we also saw President Trump come out and say that these are all left-wing judges who need to go. Very strong, harsh statements coming from White House, from none other than the president. So this is, again, a fight that we saw in the past as well, judiciary versus the executive.
Yeah, so there's certainly rhetoric coming out of the executive branch with respect to the judiciary branch. In a somewhat unusual move, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice Roberts, issued a statement recently seeming to contradict those statements made from the executive branch, and making clear that impeachment, for example, is not the mechanism where you criticize a judge or a judge's order, absent very limited circumstances, but instead the regular appellate process, appealing the case up to the Court of Appeals or ultimately to the U.S. Supreme Court, is how you fight a case if you disagree with a judge's ruling. So, absolutely there's statements being made currently by this administration. Again, just to emphasize, the judge in the case I referred to earlier was appointed by George W. Bush, certainly not, a left-wing activist, for example. John Roberts, of course, as well, was appointed by a Republican president as the Chief Justice. And so, I think, frankly, these cases are political opportunities to target and try to suppress free speech. And I suspect that those arguments will be made primarily in federal court, likely for these respondents.
Okay, then Alexander, coming to the very important aspect about green cards and visas, the sanctity of a green card, an individual being very confident of holding a green card, now no longer stands, because the administration, it seems, is now scrutinizing every word you've said, every street you've walked with or supported a protest somewhere, even if it's a very peaceful protest, and what you've said on social media. So, how fearful should Indian students or Indian green card holders be? How are they being scrutinized? What will the process look like?
So I am concerned about academic freedom, about the right to free speech based on these actions by the executive branch. When you win a green card in the U.S., you obtain what's called lawful permanent resident status. which means that that status should be permanent. Now, the actual green card, expires every 10 years, but you can file to just renew the card like you would, with kind of other cards, for example, a driver's license in the United States. But your status as an LPR, a lawful permanent resident, does not expire. However, it's absolutely concerning that Mr. Khalil has been charged, detained, is at risk of losing his green card based on his exercising his free speech under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And of course, as in this case with Mr. Suri, that he's at risk of losing his student visa. Unfortunately, in some views, the U.S. government executive branch has wide discretion to rescind, in this context, a student visa if the Secretary of State makes a designation that that individual's presence is adverse to the foreign policy interests of the United States. So I suspect in immigration court, that's somewhat of a challenging charge. However, in federal court, I think there are serious constitutional concerns regarding the right to free speech, the right to due process under the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And I suspect that those claims will be litigated vigorously by attorneys in both of these cases, including, for example, there was a case in New York of a political activist, Mr. Ravi Rockbeer, who was pardoned at the end of the Biden administration, who ultimately brought suit in the Second Circuit, and a federal judge there found a constitutional right to, quote, say goodbye, because he had been in the U.S. for decades and then was detained without notice and separated from his family. And I suspect that somewhat similarly in these cases, that federal courts will slow down, as they already have, the deportation process to analyze the very serious constitutional questions at play.
Right. Alexander, before I let you go, because you have been working in this sphere, in this area, you have colleagues, friends who are working in this area. How many panic calls are you receiving? How many people who must have written something, students who must have written something supporting a Palestinian cause or any such, how many of them are actually calling to seek or to consult with you and people who work in this sphere?
My clinic, my deportation defense clinic at Hofstra Law School, receives calls almost every single day, whether it's from clients who are scared of being detained by ICE, individuals seeking representation in immigration court, and students have come to me as well and are worried about being doxxed, having their information shared online. And I think also academics and students may already be, or may in the future, self-censor out of fear that the U.S. government will retaliate against them. And I think these are exactly the intentions of these actions, is to target high-profile activists who the U.S. government can send a message that if you speak your mind and try to speak truth to power, that there can be serious consequences, particularly for non-citizens who would be vulnerable to these type of executive actions. So I think it's very concerning from an academic freedom standpoint, constitutional rights, and of course the civil and human rights of non-citizens visiting and living in the United States.
Right. I can tell you this from my experience. We've been trying to get in touch with a lot of students who are worried and concerned. Nobody wants to come on record. So that's how fearful they are in the United States of America today. Alexander Holtzman, thank you so much for joining us here on the network.
Thank you.
Imagine waking up to find the Department of Education gone. No more federal students' loans, no national education policies, just states calling the shots. Well, Donald Trump just took the first step to making that a reality. He signed an executive order to dismantle the Department of Education. But can he actually pull it off? And what does it mean for millions of students? Here's the full story.
A major shakeup is underway in the US education system. President Donald Trump has just signed an executive order to dismantle the Department of Education. But what does this actually mean? And can a president really eliminate a government agency with just a signature? Let's break it down. First, let's understand what the Department of Education actually does. Established in 1979 by President Jimmy Carter, this cabinet-level agency oversees national education policy. It plays a crucial role in distributing federal financial aid to students, enforcing education laws, and supporting programs for disadvantaged students, including those in special education and English language learning programs. The department manages a budget of around $268 billion and employs roughly 4,400 people. Among its most important functions is administering federal student aid, which provides grants, loans, and work-study funds to over 13 million students every year. Trump has long argued that education should be handled by states, not the federal government. In fact, eliminating the Department of Education has been a goal of many conservatives for decades, with critics saying it creates unnecessary bureaucracy. However, supporters argue that the department ensures education equity, particularly for marginalized students.
But we're going to be returning education very simply back to the states where it belongs, and this is a very popular thing to do, but much more importantly, it's a common sense thing to do, and it's going to work. Absolutely, it's going to work.
Now, here's the big question. Can a president actually shut down a federal department with just an executive order? The answer is no, at least not without Congress. Since the Department of Education was created by law, it would take congressional approval to fully dismantle it. No president has ever successfully closed a cabinet-level agency in US history. Even Trump's own administration acknowledges they don't have the votes in Congress to do it completely.
This administration intends, this is why I believe this is just an illegal overreach of congressional action. This administration, with these RIF notices, have impacted every last office in the US Department of Education, not one spared. And so the impact that it will have on students with disabilities.
So what does Trump's executive order actually do? It directs Education Secretary Linda McMahon to begin the process of dismantling the department as much as possible within the limits of executive power. This could mean reorganizing certain functions, shifting responsibilities back to states, and appointing officials who share Trump's goal of significantly reducing the department's role. For now, most students won't see any immediate changes. Schools are primarily run by state and local governments, and budgets for the current year are already set. However, if federal education programs are scaled back, the long-term impact could be significant, especially for students who rely on government assistance. Experts warn that the biggest risks will be for marginalized students, including those in special education programs. Federal protections like the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act are enforced through the Department of Education. Without the department's oversight, students with disabilities could lose critical support.
For many of my students, there's already a feeling that nobody cares about me, that I'm responsible for myself. Like, nobody gives a beep about me. And I think that this very much would affirm that for them. I think that it also would cause them to say, well, why is it that I am not important enough just because I happen to be brown, just because I happen to be a minority, just because I happen to be low income? Why should I have less than because of choices that other people made? Kids who are from families that are low income, the children did not choose to be low income.
One of the biggest concerns is student loans. Right now, the Department of Education manages over $1.6 trillion in student debt for more than 43 million borrowers. If the department is dismantled, what happens to that system? The White House has said that student loan programs will continue, but it's unclear who would take over. Trump has suggested moving student loan management to the Treasury Department, the Commerce Department, or even the Small Business Administration. For borrowers currently paying off their loans, there won't be immediate changes, but future students applying for financial aid may face uncertainty as the government figures out who will oversee grants, loans, and repayment programs. So what does all this mean? Trump's executive order is a dramatic move, but it doesn't automatically shut down the Department of Education. The process would take years and Congress would have the final say. However, the effort to weaken the department could still have real consequences, particularly for students who rely on federal assistance. Bureau Report, India Today Global.
Elon Musk, the tech mogul, billionaire, and now a divisive figure in US politics, is back in the headlines. But this time, it's not about Tesla or his platform X or even his department Doge. His estranged daughter, Vivian Jenner Wilson, has publicly criticized him in a no-holds-barred interview with Teen Vogue. The 20-year-old, who legally changed her name to sever ties with Musk, called her father a pathetic man-child and dismissed his wealth and power. Take a look at this report.
In a scathing takedown, Elon Musk's trans daughter, Vivian Jenna Wilson made it clear. She has no respect for her billionaire father. She didn't hold back, calling out her father for his wealth, political influence, and controversial stances. She even said, and we quote, "I don't care how much money anyone has," unquote, dismissing his power and influence as irrelevant. Her criticism extends beyond their personal history. She called Musk's presence in the Trump administration cringe and even accused him of making a Nazi salute at a political rally. This is just the latest in the ongoing feud. Musk, who has openly opposed gender-affirming care, once blamed the woke mind virus for killing his child. Meanwhile, a major controversy is brewing at the Pentagon. The US Department of Defense is facing backlash for deleting thousands of web pages, including content on Holocaust remembrance, 9/11, and racial history. The removals come after an executive order from Donald Trump eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across the federal government. Among the deleted content, a Holocaust survivor's testimony, an article on Native American code talkers, and resources on preventing veteran suicide. The Pentagon defends the move, but critics argue it's a dangerous rewriting of history. With Musk embroiled in family drama and political controversy, and the Pentagon making sweeping changes to its historical records, the battle over identity, power, and truth rages on in America. Bureau Report, India Today.
With an eye to expand domestic production of critical minerals, US President Donald Trump has invoked emergency powers as he tries to reduce US reliance on imports from countries like China. The executive order, which uses Cold War-era legislation, instructs government agencies, including the Defense Department, to prioritize mining projects as well as providing technical and financial support to boost critical mineral production. It comes as a trade war escalates with China, which has overwhelming control over the supply chain of some critical minerals. Last year, Beijing banned the sale of some critical minerals to the United States of America, forcing American firms to look for other sources of the vital materials. Critical minerals are vital to the production of key technologies ranging from batteries to advanced weapon systems. Trump has also been eager to gain access to Ukraine's critical minerals. He said that a deal with Ukraine will be signed shortly. As the war against the Houthis intensify, Israeli military said it intercepted a missile launched from Yemen before it crossed into Israel, following the activation of warning sirens in Jerusalem and the West Bank. Sirens sounded in Jerusalem after the projectile was fired, the military said, adding that it was intercepted before it entered Israeli territory. The Israeli police said sirens were heard in Jerusalem. The military said it also downed a missile launched from Yemen earlier in the day after sirens blared in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthis said that they have carried out a qualitative military operation targeting Israel with a hypersonic ballistic missile. Houthi spokesman said the attacks were a response to what he described as the criminal Zionist enemy's massacres in Gaza, as well as American aggression in the region. Yemen's capital Sana'a saw airstrikes carried out by US warplanes, causing widespread destruction and leaving several people dead. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un oversaw the test firing of the country's latest anti-craft missile system, according to the state-run television KRT. Kim thanked what was referred to as a research group for the system. The state media said test firing showed the system was highly reliable and its combat response was advantageous. The test conducted by North Korea's missile administration was to examine the performance of a system whose production has already begun. But the state media did not specify whether the test was held. Now, great news from India's AI aspirations as Saudi Aramco-backed company Cognite has inaugurated an AI services center in Bangalore or Bengaluru. As per reports, Cognite is actively pursuing contracts with leading Indian companies, having already partnered with a major cement producer and a prominent automotive firm, choosing not to disclose any of the names here. Company CEO Girish Rishi also highlighted that the decision to come to India is a big opportunity as the world is looking for an alternative to China. This expansion also aligns with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's efforts to attract global companies, with industry giants like Apple and Tesla also announcing plans to establish their presence in India. That's all in this edition of World Today, but before I go, I leave you with this story of London's Heathrow Airport shutting down. A fire in an electricity substation in West London shut down Britain's Heathrow Airport, but now it is all under control. Aerial views on Friday morning showed smoke rising from the substation and nearby roads blocked by emergency vehicles. Heathrow was due to handle 1,351 flights during the day, flying up to 291,000 passengers.